Welcome to Rudy's Common Sense. Of course, I'm Rudy Giuliani. And on this episode of Common Sense, we're going to take a closer look at some of the recent startling facts that have emerged about Dr. Fauci and this whole situation with how CCP virus emerged. The picture has changed in 2 weeks, almost 180 degrees. Some of that is due to the work of my guest, who has made 2 or 3 of the really groundbreaking discoveries, the ones that really no one had either seen before or paid attention to before. Dr. Maria Ryan, who was formerly the CEO of Cottage Hospital. So let's get to the new discoveries, and then we'll go back on the things we've talked about in the past and just remind people how it kind of fits in. But it seems to me over the last week, which is the last time we talked about this, these amazing facts came forward. I mean, we know there's this immense censorship going on, and we've been deprived of information about this constantly. You know, hydroxychloroquine, total false information. People died. A company called Zerotech came out with a report right at the very beginning that this came from the laboratory, and it was buried, censored. In fact, PolitiFact had to put them back up after these revelations that this is a very viable theory. Yes. But they were banned for 8 months. Nobody could learn about it for 8 months. If you went on television and you said it, they'd probably bleep you out or take you off or lose all their sponsors. So that's really affected this. I mean, it's like science developing the way it used to develop in East Berlin or the Soviet Union. Yes. It's politically, this has been from the very beginning, politically directed science to get Trump out of office.
In 2001, Dr. Ralph Baric of the University of North Carolina started working with the bat coronavirus. The coronavirus family has been around since the beginning of time. It circulates in flus, but there's different types of coronavirus. But he was particularly interested in the mouse and bat coronavirus. So he started genetically making a mouse coronavirus. And you may ask, why would any scientist want to do that? Why would they want to fool around with nature? And I'm not making a judgment whether it's right or wrong, but it's called gain of function. So gain of function testing, the altruistic reasons scientists do it is they want to get ahead of nature. They want to see what it would take to make a virus infect a human. And if it does infect a human, how bad will it be? And then they can start working on vaccines and preventive measures. So that's one reason why scientists do it. And then you have scientists like in China, Iran, in different countries who do it for bioweapons. So we have Dr. Ralph Baric here in the United States at the University of North Carolina, who is nicknamed the coronavirus hunter. His counterpart in China, we talked about it on your last podcast, was Dr. Shi Zhengli. And she is called the coronavirus Batwoman. So she's been working with it since about 2003. So moving along in time, everybody knows about gain of function research. But the CDC came under fire in and around 2014. There was approximately 10 mishaps in United States laboratories. People getting infected, leaks, near misses. They were fooling around with anthrax, with some coronavirus, with MERS, SARS. So the Obama administration put a moratorium after several congressional hearings. But
they put a moratorium because they analyzed that the reward was not as great as the risk.
Absolutely.
Particularly because many of these experiments failed to,
2 decades of doing gain of function hasn't really yielded any
So
hope.
You go with this for 10 years and you don't develop a vaccine, but you've got all these very, very dangerous viruses sitting in a laboratory where it can easily, the slightest little negligence on the part of a worker, and the thing could take out an entire city.
Absolutely. So Dr. Baric and Dr. Shi Zhengli collaborated. She came to the United States. He's been to her lab in China, and they were working on the bat coronavirus.
And the name of her lab in China
is the Wuhan
the famous
Institute
Wuhan
of
Institute
Virology.
Of Virology, right.
Yeah, and it's the Wuhan lab, and it's the epicenter of the whole pandemic. So they got an exemption. So all this talk about the Dr. Fauci's department, the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, not knowing what grant money went to is a falsehood.
Let's get the timing straight here.
Okay.
So we're talking about 2015.
Correct.
Obama at this point had banned gain of function.
In the United States.
And for a very specific reason. Everybody had to know the rationale because a determination was made by the chief executive and his people that this wasn't worth it.
Right.
That they've been doing it for 10, 12 years, funding it for 10, 12 years. So far, they had developed, I assume, a number of very, very dangerous viruses that could kill populations,
yes.
or that could be used as bioweapons.
Yes, and I'm sure it's in the archival footage of those congressional
And the other side,
hearings.
you would say, okay, we did all that. We've got all this in a laboratory. We've had some escape. There's nothing to say the next one isn't going to escape. What do we have for it? And what we had for it was nothing.
Right.
So a rather responsible, strong executive decision.
Yeah.
So what happens?
So work was already underway with Dr. Barrick and Dr. Zheng Li. So they got an exemption. So in this publication that they had in 2015, they published in Nature magazine, which is a scientific magazine, their work. And it's entitled "A SARS-like cluster of circulating bat coronavirus shows potential for human emergence." This is in 2015. The names, several scientists on here, but names of note: Dr. Zheng Li of China and Dr. Ralph Barrett of the University of North Carolina. So any research article, you go through the cause, what they did, how they manipulated the virus. At the end, it's very typical for you to talk about acknowledgments, who supported, where you got grant funding from, ethics, how you dealt with animals.
And this is clearly, I mean, there's no question that this is gain of function.
This is gain of function.
At classical gain of function experimentation.
Yes.
They're trying to create a novel a coronavirus that doesn't have a cure of any kind.
Right.
And then next step, they're going to try to develop a cure. But they haven't even gotten to that step yet. Okay.
So at the end of this research article, you will see the acknowledgments. They acknowledge support from the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins.
And that is the organization right above Fauci, and Collins is really his boss.
That's correct.
Right.
And then also specifically thanking the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which is Dr. Fauci. So as the leader of those departments, they absolutely know where grant funding is going to, because as a grantor, you have to prove that the grantee is using the money for what it was intended to do.
Time for a short break. PatriotMobile.com has been behind a lot of our victories as conservatives. You know, our victory to vindicate life, and our victory so that we can have some scope and protection for our ability to protect ourselves with guns, and our victories on due process, some of which still have to be gained. And the thing about Patriot Mobile is that you'll be able to get through Patriot Mobile exactly the same phone service you have right now in terms of quality outreach, ability to reach people, safety, security, except you'll be getting it from a group of people who are like you, a group of people who are using some of the proceeds from the profits that they make to fight the battle of free speech, to fight the battle of freedom of religion, to fight the other battles that are of critical importance to us in dealing with the express train to communism that we are being taken on right now. So go to patriotmobile.com/Rudy and take a look at the deals that are there for you, and the special deals when you do /Rudy, and particularly for veterans and for first responders. Special bargains, special deals, special consideration for the people who are special. PatriotMobile.com/RUDY. Rudy, okay? Don't forget. And now we'll continue our very interesting discussion with Dr. Maria Ryan. And this is not just research. This is highly controversial research.
Very controversial.
Probably the most controversial either agency is involved in.
Right, and not every scientist believes that gain of function should be performed.
Yeah, there's a very bitter debate about this.
Yes, correct. Also under acknowledgments is thanking EcoHealth. We know that Dr. Fauci's department and Dr. Collins' department have given EcoHealth over $3 million. EcoHealth, Peter Daszak, did not use all that money for the Wuhan lab. It goes to Vietnam,
is that part
Cambodia,
of this also?
Laos. It's thanking EcoHealth in this article, but we know that EcoHealth gives money to other areas.
So of the money that NIH and Fauci's Institute gave EcoHealth, some of that money went to this experiment.
We do know that.
Because we don't know how much.
We don't know how much.
But we do know they gave money because it's listed here.
Correct. It's estimated about $800,000. The interesting thing about this is it's not just EcoHealth supporting it, right? That got the money from U.S. taxpayers. Mm-hmm. They're thanking specifically the NIH and the NIAID.
But we don't know what they gave.
We don't know what they gave. But they did give their own
And a lot of this documentation is hidden.
A lot of
and
it
a lot
is.
of it's inconsistent.
Correct.
Like some of these deliberately keep out Fauci's organization.
Yes.
But then it's Fauci's organization that plays a major role in it in another document.
Yeah. And this.
So there's some attempt to hide some of this.
So Dr. Collins, Dr. Fauci, absolutely. I know Dr. Fauci had his role. He's been in his role for over 30 years. He absolutely knew about the Obama moratorium. He was around during that time. He absolutely knows every lab that's doing gain of function. And he knew money went for this study. He also knew that they applied for and received an exemption so they can continue their work.
That exemption would be to fly almost exactly in the face of Obama's order.
Exactly.
What is so Obama decides this is too risky to do. Why would continue? And he did it based on the experiments in front of him. He looked at the experiments in front of him, right? He saw the risk in those. He saw nothing was produced, and he said, no more. It would seem to me that almost for sure all those would be stopped. Because that was part of the history by which he made the decision. Now, what gives them the gall to continue one that may very well have been part of the reason he closed it down? Or did they go to Obama? I mean, shouldn't they really go to Obama for an exemption? It's not their rule, it's Obama's rule. Now, Fauci was a big supporter of gain of function. He had given a speech in 2012 about it. I know he lies about it now, and he's been caught lying about it. But he was like a real cheerleader for gain of function. Yeah. As was Barrick.
Exactly.
As was Bat Lady.
Yes.
And as was this guy Daszak, who's going to get involved in it, who's making all this money from EcoHealth.
Yes.
And acting as seems to me, a launderer of money to the Chinese. I know you don't like the word launder. The conduit for the money to the Chinese.
Yeah.
So this goes ahead. Take us through the rest of this now, because this has a history.
Yes, so this has a history. So we also know this article was published in June of 2015. The work obviously was going on prior to that. In December of 2015, Moderna and the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, go into a contract with Moderna on vaccines. What they talk about is vaccines for MERS, SARS, other things, and anything emerging. This goes to tell me this research was very influential in their decision. They're on the verge of making this bat coronavirus having the ability to jump into humans. So part of the gain of function is to get ahead of it, get a vaccine. So they do that. I have the exact documents, and they keep making amendments to it.
So they enter into a contract.
A contract.
And it's a contract in which NIH and NAID which is Fauci's organization,
Yeah.
agree to work together to develop a vaccine. And they have ownership interest in it,
Yes.
as well as they share the patent rights.
I'll put in a little caveat here.
In other words, they're going to make money on it.
Yeah. In the past, we used to think scientists who worked on research, worked with viruses, whatever they were doing, it was very altruistic.
Oh.
There was a reason for it. They would get grants. They never became rich people. In the 1980s, there was legislation called the Bayh-Dole Act. And that act allowed for universities and scientists to gain royalties. This now pushed scientists to work more with pharmaceutical companies, really to develop drugs, vaccines, whether it's a pill for something else. That relationship was forged, and one can argue it came a little bit more about money than altruistic reasons. But we definitely know Dr. Barrick, through this relationship with Moderna and the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Disease, was going to get some of that money as well, because he was working on the whole thing.
Well, now we'll take a short break. Not long ago, Mike Lindell, the inventor of MyPillow, and his team fit me for my very own MyPillow. They also introduced me to their wide assortment of other incredible products, like their mattress topper, their sheets, towels, slippers, and more. Sleep is incredibly important to me, and I can assume for all of you. It's time you give MyPillow a try and see for yourself. Listeners have helped build MyPillow into the incredible company it is today, and Mike Lindell wants to give back to all of you. You can get great discounts on MyPillow products by going to mypillow.com right now and seeing each of the specially priced items, including those in the radio listener special square. You're going to see rotational offers up to 66% off on products like their pillows, mattress topper, Giza sheets, but also new products like their slippers, weighted blankets, robes, and waffle blankets. All MyPillow products come with a 60-day money-back guarantee. Enter promo code RUDY for these great specials. That's mypillow.com and use the promo code RUDY. Thank you for returning. The question is, did Echo Health actually participate in the experiment scientifically, or were they just passing money along so that you could clean up the money going from NIH and NAID to, after all, a communist country?
That is my next step to look. Right now, it looks like they are pass-through. They're almost like a grantor, even though they get the money from the U.S. taxpayers that they dole out where they're going to give the rest of the money to. But my suspicion is they actually are involved in some of the research, but I do not have that conclusion.
Now, at some point, this experimentation moves out of North Carolina and the United States, and it goes completely to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Yes.
Do we know exactly when that is? Because at the time that the situation occurs, they've been in the Wuhan Institute of Virology now for several years.
Yeah, it's my understanding around 2015, 2016, it then goes to China almost exclusively. We know Dr. Barrick was over in China and was at the Institute in around 2018. We also know that the U.S. Embassy at that time went to the lab and noticed several safety violations and reported back, I assume to the NIH, but I don't know what agency they reported those safety concerns.
And the gravamen of the report was that this was a negligent, not very well run laboratory that was going to do the highest levels of dangerous experiments that needed the highest level of security.
Correct.
And it did. In fact, consistently they've been described as having the security of a dentist's office.
That's correct.
So here's one of the facts that came out in the last week that completely startled me, and that I thought would change the whole nature of the coverage of this. But of course, given the ability of the corrupt press to bury things, this has been completely buried. But it changes the whole thinking on this. The lab in Wuhan, as Dr. Yan told us last week, is populated by many members of the People's Liberation Army, or better described as the Chinese Communist People's Liberation Army. And not as security guards, but as participants in the experiments.
Yes.
Shortly after she said that to us, there was an article, very, very small article in the New York Post that I thought reporters with intellectual honesty, reporters who were concerned about the best interests of the United States, reporters that gave a damn that so many people died, would have looked at this. But it says, it doesn't say when, it says that Chinese military researchers were reportedly part of a project that created mice with humanized lungs. They put out a report on this. There were 23 people. 11 of them work for the Chinese Army's Medical Research Institute.
Correct.
Now, I know that's a small article, but that's a stunning fact.
Yes.
So there are laboratories and there are laboratories, medical laboratories. When the military is working in a laboratory developing biological weapons, wouldn't you just assume that they're developing, biological constructs that could be weapons? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you assume that's why they're there?
That's why they're there. There's actually a PLA hospital in the State Department, I believe, got a report that one of the earliest victims was a scientist that was PLA, People's Liberation Army, and he was cared for in that PLA hospital.
So when it moved to Wuhan, the researchers now include members of the Chinese Communist Army.
Correct. And it had all along, even before 2015, they were working with the Bat Lady on
yes, but this becomes proof of it.
Correct.
Not followed up.
Correct.
Raised for the first time a week ago.
Correct.
So when this happens last year, and we're stunned by this virus, we're not told that Fauci has been involved in this for 12 years or so, or 10 years, that he's a big advocate of this kind of experimentation that yields something like this. We're not told that he has a financial interest in it,
right,
and that his agency has a financial interest in it.
Moderna.
We're not told that he's close friends with these Chinese communists.
Correct.
And we're not told that the military played as big a role as civilians in developing whatever this is. Right. None of that we're told about.
No.
That's all hidden from us.
And yet he knows that the SARS outbreak previously was because of a lab leak.
And then very early on, it becomes a viable theory that this developed in the lab. Because the original theory, doctor, you're a doctor, I'm not. I always considered the original theory laughable. I thought it was like a joke on one of those stupid shows at night.
That it was a lab leak or the wet market?
Laughable. It was a joke. Yeah. Somebody bought a bat in a wet market, ate it, became infected, and infected the whole world. First of all, within 2 days of just reading, you found out that the wet market doesn't sell bats. The next fact you found out was they don't have bats in that part of China. That the closest bat of that type is 1,000 miles away. They don't travel that far. And if they had traveled that far, they would have left a trail of infection. In fact, after a year and a half, they found no evidence of a transmission of that kind.
Right.
And all the other transmissions of that kind yielded 20 or 30 examples of animals in between that were infected, other humans that were infected. Of the bats, we find dead bats. Right. We found nothing.
What you said is really important, that there's been no evolutionary evidence, right? We can see this. Virologists can see the evolution if it did go from bat to humans, and there's zero evolutionary evidence that this has occurred in nature, whereas there's evidence it was manipulated and engineered in a lab.
Well, but let's get back to the facts that came out, because we haven't made them clear yet. The first fact that came out over the last week is the military was substantially present at that hospital, and the military was involved in the actual research and work being done to develop this, you could call it a bioweapon.
Yes.
It is, ultimately, whether on purpose or not, it became a bioweapon. It killed millions of people, some of them in countries that China is a competitor or enemy of. So it was used as a bioweapon. either on purpose or inadvertently.
Right.
But the military was there,
Yes.
which...
Mayor, the military actually came in January and put out notes to their employees to destroy all samples, destroy any written material on this, and in February basically shut down the lab, and they took 100% control over the lab.
Now, why would they? The second thing we find out is they're present there. Dr. Yan says it, but they have, I mean, the left has tried to treat Dr. Yan, although she's a non-communist Chinese, but the left, trusts the Chinese communists and doesn't trust the non-communist Chinese.
Who risked her life to try to tell the world.
Which seems to me to have a tremendously large affection for communism. That's very frightening. But in any event, it should have been all settled when this article came out. And they're very, very proud of the fact that they humanized lungs. And 11 of the people who did it are military people. Why would they be so proud of humanizing? What's the significance of humanizing mice lungs?
Because we know their whole objective, including Dr. Barrick here in the United States and his colleagues, their whole objective was to get the bat coronavirus to jump to a human. So they're really excited.
So they want to create something that will kill a human being.
Not necessarily kill.
Yes.
Maybe in Chinese Communist Party, again, there's different sides of gain of function, right? Some people say it's to progress what may happen in nature so we can get ahead of it and develop a vaccine. Some people say, I want to do this because if war happens or I want to, I can use it as a bioweapon. So there's two sides. Plus, we know out of 2 decades of doing gain of function in this country or collaborating with labs around the world that it has not yielded anything of any noteworthy.
And that was the answer that Obama had.
Yes.
It
was too risky. It was definitely too risky.
Too risky and no return.
Correct.
However, there is a return for bioweapon.
Right.
I mean, when I said they make something that could kill people.
People are naive.
But wait. When I say they made something to kill people, they did make something to kill people.
Yes.
The question is, what are they going to do with it? Yeah. Are they going to use it to try to find a cure, or are they going to use it to kill people? But if they don't find a cure, and somehow somebody makes a mistake, it kills people. Mm-hmm. That's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah. And the researchers knew how they were getting this virus to attack human cells was through a receptor, an angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, which we theorize are more susceptible if you have hypertension, diabetes. So it was known by the researchers, if this was to occur naturally, because we're seeing it in the lab, that those people immunocompromised, overweight, diabetes, elderly, were going to be harmed the most and potentially die from this.
Now, when these grants were given and this support was given by Fauci, by Collins, by Daszak of Echo Health, and by
That's a lot to answer to, by the way.
and by the Corona Hunter,
Yes, Dr. Barrick.
they all knew the military was involved in this.
Yes.
So
There's no doubt.
So now, if you were them,
There's no plausible.
if you were them, wouldn't you realize you were creating a biological weapon?
I would think so, Rudy.
Wouldn't common sense tell you that?
Deductive reasoning.
What's all these
common
military
sense.
people doing here?
Absolutely.
Lieutenant this one, the sergeant that one.
And we're naive to think bioweapons don't occur. We've done it in the United States. It happened during World War II. The Japanese used a lot of bioweapons against the Chinese. Heck, in the French and Indian War on this soil, the English used smokebox contaminated blankets to give to the Indians. That's a form of bioweapon.
And we're talking about a regime that has killed more of its own people than any in the history of the world. We're talking about we're talking about a homicidal regime.
Absolutely, they care.
Do you think they're just fools, or do you think they're conspiring with them?
I don't know, and this may sound Pollyanna, but all the time when I'm looking at an issue, I try to put myself in other people's shoes. And one place I can't get to is why in actually November, we knew 3 scientists got sick from that Wuhan lab. So Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, Dr. Barrick, and a number of other people knew what was going on in that lab. Why didn't they stand up in November and say, look, we got a leak, shut it down, no country, Italy, everybody, United States, don't allow one person from China to come to this country. They could have stopped the pandemic.
Well, before we try to conclude on that, how do you explain Dr. Fauci's recent, extremely strong defense of the Chinese Communist Party, in which he says that people shouldn't be making these false accusations without any more evidence against the Chinese Communist Party, or that he trusts the Chinese Communist scientists. He sees no reason why the Chinese communists would lie. After all, it could kill their own people. I would consider that one of the most ignorant statements I have ever seen, one of the most uneducated and ignorant statements I've ever seen from an American official.
Yeah.
Maybe this man never took history. He just took science.
Yeah.
Maybe he never read about.
Or one may wonder if he's got financial interests.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at.
I don't know any of that.
Is he a one-trick pony where he only knows about science and he's an ignoramus about world history, or is he a corrupt man?
Yeah.
How would you say about China that it would be illogical that they would produce a weapon that could kill lots of other people, but maybe even some of their own, when just recently they were killing girl babies, when they have at least 3 million people that we know of in concentration camps, when the death toll, if you count up Mao through Xi, is about 60 million Chinese, and where the basic thought is they wouldn't mind losing population.
Dr. Yan, I believe on your podcast, she made the accusation that this wasn't a lab leak. She makes the accusation that it was deliberately put out in the Wuhan wet market, that yes, it was put out in that wet market, not the way they were saying. And here was her thought process, and I don't want to speak for her, I believe it's on the podcast, that immediately the Chinese Communist government started buying up PPE from around the world, personal protective equipment. They were already working on their own vaccine. They already have a lot of our own, drug manufacturing, mask manufacturing, and then they were selling it. We have proof. They did it in the United States, selling it at exuberant prices, price gouging everybody, and that it was purposely to take down the other nations. We know their long-term game is to take over the world, right? They've said it. You've made that
Xi has made several times the statement in front of party congresses that by 2048 he wants to eclipse America.
Yes.
And then when you get into their Global Times and their dominated newspapers, kind of like our New York Times and Washington Post and NBC and MSNBC, which are really organs of now the Biden government.
Or the Chinese Communist Party. That's been the allegations. These papers are owned and
well,
paid
they certainly
or by Soros. They're certainly not for the American
They certainly
people.
have a great sympathy for them, because last week, when Fauci sort of lost himself in this big defense of Chinese communism, alarm bells should have gone off. Alarm bells should have gone off. They misled him, or he's a conspirator. So when this first came out, they kept telling me everything's fine and wonderful. He told the president that, which is why the president made some statements that he'd probably rather not make. They came from Fauci. Right. How would the president have known? The president's not a scientist. Right. If I had Fauci and I trusted Fauci and he told me those things, I would trust him.
President Biden, President Trump.
But now Fauci knows they lied to him back then. Or maybe they weren't lying to him. Maybe he was lying to the president. But in any event, he sure as heck shouldn't be very friendly with the Chinese Communist government now. And he's telling us, don't defame the Chinese Communist government. Why not? There's so much to defame them about. Why shouldn't we? Number two, I trust them. They're not going to kill their own people. That is, yes, Fauci, you just happen to pick the worst regime for saying that in the whole history of the world. You happen to pick the regime that probably killed more of its own people than any other. I mean, my goodness, at least you pick one that had a spotty record, fine. But what do you think we are, fools? I think he does think we're fools. I think he thinks we're fools unless he can suck up to you, like the movie stars he calls, like the rich multi-billionaires that he calls. This is a very strange man. There's something very, very wrong with him. So let's go back. Let's go back to the very beginning. When you knew about it, but January 3rd of 2020, Christian Anderson, who's the developer of the largest biomedical facility that works with them, texts him and says, some of the features, now looking at this, look engineered. All of our guys find the genome inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory. He is then cut off, told to communicate by telephone, and then 2 months later, or a month later, he publishes a paper saying that the idea that it was developed in the laboratory is ludicrous.
Yeah, it was less time frame in that, and I was always very suspect. What happened? Was he paid off? Was he threatened?
Well, doctor, can I make the time frame shorter?
Yes.
You think the time frame is 6 weeks, 4 days, because there's another text. Anderson sent an email 3 to 4 days later, 3 or 4 days after saying that that all his people found the genome inconsistent with expectations of evolutionary theory. 4 days later, he sends an email to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, where he's going to publish, that's Nature, where he's going to publish it. And he called the ideas that the virus was engineered, quote, crackpot theories. And data shows conclusively it was not done. So,
I'm so tired of people.
4 days before, he is warning Fauci that it comes from the laboratory. Most likely. Fauci says basically by saying, let's do it on the telephone, shut up. Within 4 days, he's able to do sufficient research that contradicts all of his people who all find, and he's so sure of it, it's now a crackpot theory, and he has conclusively shown that it wasn't done in the lab. He couldn't possibly have done that in 4 days.
Maybe he gave him shares of the Moderna stock.
He basically did. Because the other fact that the corrupt press leaks out, including this one, is right after the Nature article, what did the National Institute of Health do? What did they do? They gave him a grant.
Yeah.
They gave a multi-million-dollar grant to the guy who changed his mind in 4 days. Now, am I a fool?
No.
I'm supposed to believe this is honest?
No.
One day he says it comes from the laboratory. 4 days later he says that's a crackpot theory. And 2 months later he gets $1 million. Oh, millions of dollars.
Well, this is a lesson. This whole thing is a lesson to the American people. Our government and the government agencies have been corrupt almost since the beginning of our beautiful nation, and we need more citizen oversight. I certainly would go on a committee with Rand Paul to look at all of this.
Democrats will not let Rand Paul near a committee. Rand Paul should get the Pulitzer Prize or the Nobel Peace Prize or the American Freedom Medal for the work that he's done. I mean, you should, but you've done it privately and you've done it as a journalist because you were telling me from day one. I mean, you've had me on the right course here from day one, looking at this critically. And now that I look at this thing with Anderson, as a prosecutor, I say, this is about as criminal as you can get. You're warning the guy that it comes from the laboratory. The guy gets a little secret time to talk to you. 3 days later, you're not just saying, well, I'm thinking about it. I'm looking at it. There is it. Now it becomes a crackpot theory. And then you publish the article, and then you get a bunch of millions.
Right.
Whoa, follow the money, baby. Follow the money. And you get to the crooks. How about Francis Collins? I mean, there's another. He's the head of the NIH. He's
Correct.
The boss, right?
He knows everything going on.
He's frightened.
As does Dr. Fauci.
His texts, we won't go through all of them, but his texts show that he is very concerned about this laboratory theory. And Fauci just shuts him off and says, we better talk in private.
Even Dr. Barrick, when he first heard about this, he was interviewed by a reporter in North Carolina, and he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, When it quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, it is a duck. He said it is too much in close proximity to that Wuhan lab without looking at it
Fauci
coming.
got him to change his tune too. And then Fauci goes on a big campaign to sell the stupid wet market theory.
He had the power to shut this down. That's what makes me
But he
angry.
goes, but
3 million people did not have to
he
die in
is
this
warned
world.
by Anderson. He's warned by Anderson. He's warned by 3 other people that this is from the laboratory.
He knows it was from the lab.
Two
He
studies,
didn't have to be warned.
2 studies come out that are censored, that it comes from the laboratory. There is not a single piece of scientific evidence of the Wuhan wet market theory. Nothing emerges that proves it. This is a man who says he follows the science, which may be the biggest lie of last year.
Yes.
He
It's called
follows
the
no
big lie.
science at all.
Yes.
He either follows whims or money.
Yes.
One or the other.
Yes.
Or political advantage. 3 possibilities.
Well, from previous texts, we know
This
his
is
love
exactly-
letters to Hillary Clinton.
This is exactly in the ethics course on science you should teach a guy not to be. Fauci then says things like development in the laboratory is far-fetched. There's no indication it was deliberately engineered, except for all the people that told him it was deliberately engineered, except all the scientists that said that in looking at it, it looks engineered.
Mayor, even before that, he acknowledged what was going on in that lab. Nobody
yeah, back
had
in
to tell him it
back
was
in
being
15.
engineered. His department put the money, U.S.
engineer
taxpayers,
it.
to do it. Nobody had to warn him.
He was paying to engineer it.
Of course, because he believes in gain of function. And again, I'm making no judgment at this point whether it's right or wrong. I can tell you where I lean, but I'm trying to put myself in his shoes that he truly believed this is what you should do to preemptively
nice person,
make
Dr. Ryan.
vaccines. But here's
You
where
really are such a kind person.
Here's
I mean,
where I
this
get
guy
upset
told
with him.
MSNBC, I don't like people who say this. He told MSNBC the United States should not be accusatory or pointing fingers at the Chinese Communist Party. What? We shouldn't be accusatory, pointing fingers at the Chinese Communist Party? Doesn't he know whether he's right or wrong on any of his other theories where he is wrong? That at a minimum, it's quite obvious that China spread it around the world. Let's even assume that Fauci and all his, what shall we call his scientists, warped scientists, are correct. And this was the fact that the people in Wuhan got stuffed on bats. I mean, they just ate 4,000 bats that don't exist in Wuhan and don't get sold there. But somehow, miraculously, somebody brought all these bats to Wuhan, and the people who hate bats and never eat bats decided we're going to have a bat feast. So they had their bat feast, and they spread it around the world. What did China do? What did the Chinese Communist Party do? It closed down Wuhan, said, eat all the bats you want, Wuhan die. You're not going to infect the rest of China. But by the way, why don't you go travel?
Yes, they allowed them, knowing what was going on, they allowed them to participate in Chinese New Year. They allowed them to travel all around
1 month,
the world.
January, 400,000 of them traveled. Now, Trump shut them off at the end of January.
I was always very proud of President Trump for
Okay.
making that bold move. If Dr.
Who
Fauci
objected
told
to it?
him the truth in November, it could have been
Dr.
shut down.
Fauci objected to
Yeah.
the shutdown because China objected to it.
Yeah.
Now, Peter Daszak. We got to talk about Peter Daszak just a little bit because I think he's one of the problems here. Peter Daszak owns this Eco Health Alliance.
He's the president.
And he's a very, very strong proponent
Yes.
of gain of function.
Yes.
Big. He was like a
Yes.
cheerleader for gain
Yes.
of function. As was Fauci, by the way, for all his lying.
Correct.
And he is the go-between. He sort of was the excuse for Fauci's lie about a week ago to, who was he being questioned? Oh, Rand Paul. When he told Rand Paul under oath that he didn't fund the gain of function, he didn't fund this experiment. And then it came out that he did, and he did it through Eco Health.
But we also know, Mayor,
That he funded it, we know it now.
directly.
But we didn't. You only found that out, and we did a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
I mean, Rand Paul didn't have that available.
Right.
but he had the DaySac stuff available.
Mm-hmm.
So I see this Echo Alliance as a laundering operation. They put a little distance. They put a little distance between Fauci and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the interesting thing is that even in the papers you showed me, some of those papers that are public do not mention Fauci's main role. Makes it look like it's an NIH thing. But then when you go to the more hidden papers, yes, NIH put money in, yes, NIAID did, but the work was actually done with Fauci's people. They were the worker bees. Why all this?
I don't know.
Why all this lying?
Because if you believed in gain of function and you supported it financially with our taxpayer dollar, you should be accountable to the people. So again, I keep going back to November of 2019. If they were honest with the American public, said, hey, we know what was going on in that lab. Deductive reasoning will lead you to believe it's come from that lab. We can't allow anybody leaving China to anywhere in the world.
Zach, another one of the conspirators here, was praising gain of function just several days before this broke.
Some people really believe in it.
But then he changed his mind. And then he profusely thanked.
A lot of the money.
Then he sent a text, another one of Fauci's interesting texts. The guy who profusely thanked him for it is thanking him for sticking with the idea that it didn't come from the lab. Why? Because...
Is he afraid to be liable?
Darn right he's afraid to be liable, criminally and civilly.
Dasick, Barrick, Fauci, they all should be held accountable for not protecting human life.
Well, Barrick and Zhengli, that's the American and the Chinese. Mm-hmm. Again, the nicknames will help. Tell us the nicknames.
For her, she's called the Bat Lady, Bat Woman.
And for him?
Because of all her prolific work with the bat coronavirus, and he's called the coronavirus hunter.
So the two
hunter.
The two of them are the main ones that developed this.
Yes.
With the help of scientists in the U.S., scientists in China.
Correct.
And now we know with the help of the Chinese military.
Correct.
Particularly with regard to humanizing the mice.
Yes.
So that they could be good stand-ins for humans.
Yes.
So the idea is you humanize the mice, because if you get it to the mice and it infects the mice, then there's a good chance it's going to infect humans. Yeah. Is that right? Am I right?
Correct. And even before the 2015 research article, Dr. Shizheng Li published another one in 2013 talking about after they get into mice that they were going to go to primates. And the scientific community was up in arms.
Can I just draw one last conspirator into this?
You certainly can.
Well, you have a text. These texts are really... when I was a prosecutor, I never got things like this that were this good. I had to do it with witnesses who committed crimes. We had to rehabilitate them. Gosh, I wish I had texts like this. February 2nd, 2020, Francis Collins, the head of NIH, to Fauci, references an article he's very concerned about in Zero Hedge, reporting that basically through tests that were done, that COVID-19 appears to many to be an artificially created biological something or other that could be a weapon. Fauci asked him to take the conversation on a phone call.
I'm sure. Fauci's actually very smart when it comes to covering his butt.
All of a sudden, we don't know how, but within a day or two, the dictatorial organization known as Twitter, run by oligarch Dorsey, cancels Zero Hedge.
Wow.
So do you think there's a direct line of communication between these guys who are trying to engineer these deadly viruses and big tech, so big tech will do what they want, particularly in an election year where you can make Trump look bad? I mean, that's pretty strange. Within 2 days, all they said was it comes from the lab. That's a legitimate theory.
Right.
That was the theory that Anderson had actually the day before. February 1st, Anderson writes to Fauci saying it comes from the laboratory. February 2nd, Zero Hedge comes out, says it comes from the laboratory. Well, that's a legitimate scientific theory. And then within a day or two, after Fauci says to Collins, no, let's talk privately, all of a sudden, Twitter takes down Zero Hedge. Now, I have to tell you, about 6 months later, they had to restore zero hedge. Because they had no basis for taking them down.
Not only
other
was
than
it
to
good
cover up the conspiracy.
deductive reasoning, good scientific theorizing, it shows just how Twitter and big tech is censoring freedom of speech.
Then on the 17th of February 2020, Collins sends another link to a Fox News story in which it's referencing the laboratory as the source. And again, cuts it off. It looks like Fauci's the guy that can get things killed with the corrupt press. Of course, he was their darling, right? They were even making suggestions that he was as sexy as Andrew Cuomo. And then we have this fellow, Hugh Auchincloss. And in this case, he's worried if NIH is involved in the gain of function experiments. And once again, he's put off on, let's talk quietly. I wonder if he showed him the contract. I wonder if Fauci showed Hugh Auchincloss, are we involved in it? We're paying for it.
Yeah, we're paying for it.
And we own
U.S.
it.
tax dollars.
We own part of the patent. Hey, we own part of the patent, baby. So I think we've covered most of it. We'll go way back now to October of 2012, just to show that this is a long-standing, major emotional commitment of this very strange man, Fauci. But that's when he spoke to the American Science for Microbiology and acknowledged that there's a risk, but said that the risk is well worth taking.
Yes, he
for
firmly believes
change
that.
of functions.
Yep. As I said, the scientific community, there's some neutral, but most are on one side, don't do it, it's too risky, or the other side, that it's worth the risk.
Well, this has been very, very helpful. I have a suspicion that more is going to come out.
I do too.
Because I thought we were there last week with the kind of the full story, and since last week we found out that.
Well, you're the first one that's highlighting the military connection.
Well, I can't imagine why they make a big deal out of this. I mean, the military is involved in developing this, and we're starting to have questions about whether it was a biological weapon or not. If our intelligence agencies are having trouble with this, then they are either too stupid to be our intelligence agencies, or they've been infiltrated by the Chinese. When military scientists are there, they are certainly at least considering the possibility of using it as a biological weapon. Generally, you don't bring in large numbers of military scientists to cure people.
Right.
That isn't their job.
No.
Their job is to kill people. Yeah. Well, Doctor, I have to congratulate you again on being the first one, not only to interview Dr. Yan, which you did brilliantly and got her ready, but interviewing her again, and also developing these additional facts that others hadn't seen, particularly this financial interest now that's developed on the part of NIH, on the part of Fauci, and not just the financial interest, but the failure to disclose it, the sneakiness of that.
Yeah. My whole role is to educate the people on the truth, so we as citizens can make sure it never happens again. We have to demand honesty in our leadership.
Thank you.
But thank you for having me.
Well, you'll be back. I have a suspicion that this hasn't stopped yet. I think there's a lot more to this, and unfortunately, I think it's very, very dirty. But thank you, Doctor.